Yeah.
I mean, yeah, this is like the only human face you're probably going to see in this presentation. It's the face of Greg Weisman in the middle there. That is, he is really like the brain behind this entire show. And like I said, you don't expect anything sort of Evolian capital T tradition here. He is a part of the tribe, like pretty much every person who worked for Disney in the '90s, and probably every person who works for Disney now. Within like these sort of the people who actually make decisions about what's
Yeah.
being done there or not. So we're not getting away from that. I'm sorry, but they exist on a scale, right? There's some who are like really subversive, and other ones of them who are more interested in trying to explore stuff.
I'm sure his position as a producer was earned totally fairly without any nepotism at all.
Well, yeah, even that has to be on a scale, right? I think that
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
even among
He
the
might
people
be
that
he might be a normal person, but the reason he's in that position might just be,
yeah, I
a
think
bit of emergent behavior.
of course. I mean, there are usually probably 1,000 people who have similar ideas to him, but in a sense, I think he is a shot slightly taller and a little bit above the rest in terms of his creative output. Like he's worked on other shows as well, like I think the Spectacular Spider-Man he did later, Young Justice. He's done a lot of these superhero shows.
Is
which
that the
are
Spider-Man show that I remember where like Peter Parker is like super jacked?
I don't think so. It's not the
Okay.
'90s
Is that the
show.
Amazing Spider-Man?
Yeah, no, I think it's just called Spider-Man. The
Okay.
'90s show where everybody's jacked. But I think generally the quality that he has in terms of making like cape shit stuff is really above a lot of other people. And there's stuff that he's invented and created that we'll get into later that's being used by other script writers and so on. So, and he seems to be like less interested in just pushing political narratives rather than creating stories that are more intricate. But of course, the question here on the slide is like, what is a gargoyle? And I mean, to be fair, when I saw the first episode of this show, I've not seen a gargoyle in real life. I think my first exposure to a gargoyle was through other Disney films, like say The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I think that's the first time I saw like what a gargoyle could look like.
I don't have the timeline correct if it was Hunchback of Notre Dame or if it was like in an actual church, but it must have been around the same time. But yeah, I can understand what you're saying.
So I mean, I it's easy to kind of scoff at the idea of trying to explain what a gargoyle is to the people who are watching the stream, but then I remembered that, of course, I had not seen one in real life until I was an adult, and I can't take that for granted. I mean, how many gargoyles exist in Norway? I don't think we have a single one actually that I can think of. So you'd have to be, perhaps in France or
yeah,
certain, parts of the old countries to see them. And I mean, most of the time they just exist as like this type of to just carry water off the buildings. So they just like squirt the water, just pours out of their mouth in a sense. Like you'd have a gutter, basically an extension of the gutter that just has a kind of a decorated stone statue that just pours water down. Of course, others have made them more as statues that just supposed to stand and decorate the walls, like the one that's pinned on the billboard. So, of course, now that you know what they are, we can sort of explain like the premise of this show is that we now live in like this alternate universe where gargoyles are like a biological being that exists, and how they function is that during the day they're basically stone statues, and during the night they're able to break out of these stone statues, like you see in the intro. They make like a big screamy scene, and they're basically alive then for I think 10-12 hours until the sun comes back up again, where they have to return to their sort of stone state. And this is something that makes them vulnerable. So in this show, the way they survive is by engaging, like getting into pacts with human beings where they will live on castles, protect the castle during the night, be stone during the day, and then just have the mutual benefit of have the human beings protect them when they're vulnerable as stone creatures.
And them protecting the humans at nighttime.
Yes. And I mean, that's something that's used to great effect in the show. Not only, the fact that they're asleep during the day, it allows most of the action to happen at night. So then you get this kind of like neo-noir type style aesthetic, like you see in the picture in the bottom right there, where it's always nighttime, like a detective story or like it's Batman, basically. So I mean, we're coming back to Batman. These creatures are basically like the Batman made into like a biological creature. It's difficult to kind of explain.
I mean,
it
they can't even
any other
fly
way.
technically. They can pretty much just glide. Is like
Yeah,
a
of course
lore point.
they're quite like liberal about gliding
Of course.
in the show, how it actually works. It's basically they can fly, but they need to be at an elevated point to start flying. So that's how they traverse the world, is that they will either fly or they can crawl up the walls because of their super strength and claws. So they can crawl up rocks and so on.
Now,
They
the
they have,
basic.
you know,
Sorry, keep going.
yeah, no, they have like human level intelligence, and they're not immortal either. They actually do die of old age, even though they last longer than human beings. But like
I
the
think
story,
I feel the show is a bit fast and loose on sort of what levels of damage they can take, because at some point they're like, they can almost get shot at without taking any damage, and then once the plot bullet hits, that's damaging, right?
yes. But they are more robust than regular human beings.
Yes.
But it's seemingly quite easy to kill them as stone, and this is another thing that the stone mechanic allows in this show, is that you can have people or characters killed, right? They're put into stone, and then you're smashing a stone statue. I mean, you're actually killing someone, but in terms of this, when you're dealing with censorship and censorship bodies, it's a little bit easier to get away with. I mean, I'm just showing the kids someone smashing a stone statue. I'm not actually showing
someone stabbing someone, or actual
somebody
death.
bleeding, even though the show does go in that direction as well. Like they don't they take it as far as censors allow in the 90s. And like, as a bit of a throwback to like Longhouse 2, where we discussed a lot of transhumanist topics, I did a rant on the movie Existence by David Cronenberg, where I made the comment that in the 90s it was quite usual to use a lot of these abnormal mechanics to avoid censorship. Like you have these kind of sci-fi transhuman plots where you will insert new body parts and new orifices and things into people, and people will do stuff with these orifices, and like the censors are not going to know exactly how to classify it, because it's not something that really exists in the world, even though I think from the perspective of the mammalian brain, this is clearly something sexual or something
sexual,
like deeply
or violent, or
deeply violent. And in one sense, I can say that I'm not particularly happy about them being subversive with the censorship codes. But on the other hand, you can see that the censorship code enforces creativity into these products, because when you have more liberal censorship like we have now, like if you're watching episodes of something like Black Mirror as an example, where they'll just show straight up sex, right? It's just straight up pornographic sex, or Game of Thrones, and
there's not even any layering, right?
No, there's no layering, there's no creativity in it. We'll just show porn, like, and that's how I feel about a lot of these.
That's entertaining, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, but I mean, people want to. You can make sure that people are watching, right? If you have,
that's
just
what
like
I mean.
showing people
here's porn, and someone gets stabbed while he's having sex. Continue to next episode, right?
But it's lazy, right? It's extremely kind of lazy in a way that, okay, we just need to get more viewership. We'll just put in more, more pornography and more stabbings. So in the 90s, you had to be a little bit more creative, and that led to people exploring stuff like sci-fi and magic, and this show does both. I mean, in this universe, you have both magic and science fiction basically cooperating, and that's what I talked about, like with the the 90s liberalism and the complete synthesis of every viewpoint, where we're like both Evola and Isaac Asimov have like a get together moment, and sort of we combine we combine the ideas into something new. Even though like the idea that you can combine ideas like that, it's based on a flawed, very eclectic understanding of what they actually are, but that flaw, that fallacy, enables something else. And that's what I kind of like about the 90s, is that there's a lot of fallacies going on in terms of how things were going to work out with multiculturalism and so on. But in some sense,
there was an earnestness in trying to work through it, right? And trying to create something greater out of it.
Yes, I'm going back to the language of George Soros that we talked about in the Open Society episodes. He uses the term a fertile fallacy, right? In the sense that maybe you're mistaken about certain hard realities of the world, but that fallacy enables you to create something that could become a new reality. In a sense,
yeah, you can use it to slingshot yourself even to even greater heights, right?
Yes, and I mean Soros basically says that he thinks the Enlightenment is a fertile fallacy, even though like the idea that human beings are rational, self-guiding individuals, it's not entirely true. It allowed for new political systems that launched us forward, in a sense. So
That's a
and that's
very
how
progressive
I,
view of
yeah.
things.
Well, it is, but in some sense, I think there's a kind of point there. You can say that it launches us backward, but there are stuff that came out of the Enlightenment in a sense that. I mean, we can sit and trash progress all we want, but there has been stuff that's happened, technologically in like the last, 100 years that has been quite,
Oh yeah.
quite impressive, right? It's
Yeah.
so you can't. I'm not going to just slam
No, you have to
everything
take the
as,
good with the bad, right? So
everything as bad. I'm not. I'm not a third worldist, right? But okay, I'm just getting way off topic here. So to explain gargoyles as a sort of concept, we have then a castle, as you see in the bottom left there, that is in Scotland in the year 997, which is not historically accurate from what I can see. The first castle in Scotland was raised in, I think, in 1100 something, right? So that didn't really exist. But like
that
with
Scots.
this Greg Weisman guy, he wants to kind of explore. He wants a little bit of everything, right?
Mm.
And it's not going to be satisfying to like these hardcore history buffs. But
he uses a lot of that stuff pretty much as like a vessel for like surface level Shakespeareanism, I feel.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the Shakespeareanism is also surface level, right? So instead of having like references to other Disney stuff, he actually puts a lot of Shakespeare in here, even though I think like his understanding of that is quite surface level, which is okay because my understanding of Shakespeare is surface level as well. So I mean, this is a thing that I thought about this show. If I had more time, maybe I would like try to read up more on Shakespeare. But I think I might be wasting my time because it's I don't think he really goes into
the wizard character in the castle timeline feels like a Shakespeare character without any Shakespeare lines, if that makes sense, because he speaks very different from everyone else.
The Shakespearean drama is quite heavy,
and the tragedy of him sort of dooming his friends, and then because he believes that is he like technically like secretly in love with the princess or something.
I don't remember like all of the details of that.
Like his tragic story is pretty much that the princess, he thinks the princess is killed and he blames the gargoyles, so he turns them into stone, but then he finds out she isn't dead, but he can't undo the spell, so he's pretty much doomed his friends.
Yeah, that's a Romeo and Juliet type.
Exactly right.
Type twist to it. I mean, of course, that storyline goes way further as well, where it's like, okay, well, they weren't dead, but they were dead somewhere else, and they bring in all kinds of mythologies as well. Like, if you were like a kid in the 90s, this show would have been a great way to learn about mythologies, even though it's represented like completely wrong in terms of the source material. You'd figure out that, okay, Odin is something that exists, right? The Banshee is something that exists. Certain like African mythologies are brought up here that I don't remember. Like in particular, they have a part in the second season that's like this really globe-trotting, more padded part of the show where they just go travel to like every country and interact with some mythological creature.
Can I play the Norway segment?
Well, yeah, actually you can, because they have an episode where they go to Norway, where they meet Norwegians who have a completely normal Norwegian conversation, so you can play that for the kicks.
Today was your best game yet, Gunther. You were the star of your team.
Well, you're a great teacher, Papa. What was that?
I'm Erik Sturluson. This is my son, Gunther. Our farm is just up the road. You're an American.
Papa? Her story doesn't make sense. If Elisa was out hiking when the storm came up, why wasn't she wearing a parka?
Do not pry, son. When she wants to tell us what really happened, she will.
It's Gunnar Sturluson and his son Gunther. Now that I'm listening to it, someone in the chat, please go check. Has that guy voiced in Skyrim?
It would have been funny. Yeah, this is what I imagine like every time Academic Agent tries to watch this show, that this is what we sound like.
Inga Durgan, yeah.
Herga Durga, right, Lutefisk. But to kind of explain the a bit more of the Shakespearean plot, the original gargoyles that live in this castle in the bottom left there, that are like this the Viren clan. That's apparently a place in Scotland. they live there as protectors of this castle, and you kind of see how they work is that they protect the castle at night against Viking raiders and other people who try to invade, and they're being treated quite poorly. And this is sort of a theme in the show, that everybody hates these gargoyles, and it's sort of very ramped up in the third season, where it's one of these things that are, I think is a little bit subversive, because it's never actually explained. They spend so much time fleshing out a lot of other stories, but they never actually explain why people don't like gargoyles. I mean, they don't even invoke any religious reason. That's something that could have done, is that to say that, this is like this is a heresy or something, or like this is kind of having these gargoyles is sacrilege.
I get the sense that the captain guy likes them, but he, well, spoiler alert, I guess, ends up betraying them for some other practical reason, right? His hand is forced.
Yes. I mean, so but most people, I guess, through most of history in this show, just hate gargoyles. That's just kind of the default state. But the gargoyles themselves are very much, both because of their vulnerability, they have to stay where they are, and they have like their own culture and their own tradition that is explained in the show. That they're very much sort of honor bound and duty bound to always protect the castle that they live in. So even if they're being treated as shit by the human beings, they have to stay there, because that's like it's their way of life in a sense. They have a lot of other traditions as well, like they don't use names for anything, or they have monogamous relationships, but they share kids in a sense. So monogamous couples will produce eggs that are put into a rookery, and when the eggs hatch, they will all have to just like shared ownership of the garglings, if you will. So, but what happens here is that, of course, one of the I guess he's sort of a taskmaster or something, who or a general who was like a contact, who's like the main kind of contact person for the gargoyles and the interfacing between the gargoyles.
He's the captain,
the royalty,
of the forces or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds correct. And he is unhappy. That's at least on the surface what you see. Is he's very kind of heartbroken about how badly they're being treated, and it goes to the point where he sort of feels like these human beings are so rotten that it would be justified for them to be overthrown in a sense. So he allows for he allows basically the kind of Viking band led by Håkon the Viking to raid the castle. And of course, the agreement is supposed to entail that he would leave the gargoyles alone, but of course he chooses not to do this because he knows the gargoyles are dangerous. So he ends up just like smashing the majority of these gargoyles. And there's of course this large complicated plot about who done it, who did this, and who did that in the end. But the final result of this is that there's a certain handful of gargoyles that were away when this raid happened, who were not smashed, and they returned to the castle. And they're so, basically, this includes the leader of the gargoyles, Goliath, and they're so kind of heartbroken about what's happened that they basically ask to just be permanently frozen in stone. So the
elf wizard guy freezes some of them because he blames them, and then the remaining guys, or Goliath specifically, is like, well, I'm gonna, you got to do it to me too, because I don't want to live without my pals.
He's a bro at the end, right? So,
and because he believes his wife is dead, he has a fantastic Phantom of the Opera moment where he says something like, "Oh no, my midnight angel," and then he does the like as the castle crumbles around him.
Well, you get to put a lot of this drama in there, and it's played completely sincerely in the show. And I mean, if there's if you ask me like, what do I see in this show, is that they're able to play these things completely sincerely.
And the gargoyles get away with being sort of like hyper dramatic, because it's almost like that's their character, right? It's their species act like that.
Yes, and they come from a different time as well.
So too, yeah.
But this is what happens then. Is that of course they stay frozen in stone, but there's a sort of caveat to the spell that if they've been put into stone for over 1,000 years, and then they're elevated above a certain point, and they're elevated above the clouds, then the spell will be broken, right? And they come back to life. And so that's what happens, is that you have like this eccentric billionaire character, David Sanatos, that just he travels to this castle and he finds these gargoyles, and apparently he's read somewhere that they're actually like living beings. So he just pays to have the entire castle kind of like moved with helicopters to his skyscraper in Manhattan.
Top of his skyscraper.
But I mean, this is a kind of cool, you know, when I talked about like this sort of 90s synthesis of the new and the old things, is that you have like a Manhattan skyscraper, and then you put like a medieval castle on top of it, like you see in the bottom right corner. And that stuff at night. So when that happens, they of course break free, and they have to try to accustom themselves to the new world and figure out how they're going to deal with you know, their own situation, what they're going to do with their traditions, if there are any other living gargoyles and so on. So there's some, you know, a lot of the plot, I guess, in the first season is revolved around them figuring out how things work in the future and trying to accustom themselves to basically, you know, the 90s New York, which of course I mean, I've understood that New York has always been kind of shit, but I assume that it was also less shit in the 90s, right?
Yeah, there's some hints towards that in terms of the culture, I guess. But what I was gonna say regarding, like, this is probably like 15 minutes ago, regarding the fact that these characters are quite smart. I mean, you have these people like Goliath, who are then placed into a future 1,000 years into the future, and he's still able to pick up and you know, carry conversations based on context clues. You know, people will say something to him, and he'll be like, "What's that?" And they're like, well, it's a thing that, you know, you can track something with it. Oh, some kind of spell? Yeah, I guess. Okay, and then he uses that concept, you know, further in his thinking without, you know, being hung up on what is the thing.
Yes, I mean, it's a very nice attention to detail, because the tempting thing to do would just be to pretend that they just know everything, right? If you're like a lazy screenwriter for a cartoon.
You know, spend a lot of screen time having them like trying to figure out, you know, modern New York, which they do, you know, as jokes for the kids at times, by them being fascinated by the TV and stuff, but they're able to pick up on sort of the uses of the tools quite quickly.
Yes, and of course you have like these other,
a lot of smart people would be able to, you know, once you get over the initial overwhelming, of course, concept.
Yes, I think so too. Especially like with people from the past who were smart. If they were put in a situation and they have to adapt, I think they would adapt quite readily. There's no, you know, certain people could of course get completely hung up on
people today use, you know,
details
phones without understanding how they work. So
yes, it's not that hard to. I mean, there's been, you know, similar concepts. It's like I hold this rock or whatever, and it comes a voice out of it, and I just talk back into it. It's not, you know, the actual interfacing between these tools are very simple, even though the technology behind it are just way beyond what most people understand. And it's dependent on like this highly specialized, you know, global network of people who each know small bits of how it works. But it's it doesn't say anything about the quality of the regular human being, which I think is actually quite a bit lower than it would have been in the year, you know, 997.